Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our hosts an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun.
Okay, well, we are really lucky today to be joined by Tom Hardin. Tom, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Scott.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure. We're really excited here. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on Tom because what we're here to talk about today is insider trading, and Tom is about as well versed on the rules on insider trading, especially in the U.S., as probably anybody. So first of all, I'm going to give a little bit of background on Tom, and then we'll get into the chat. So Tom spent much of his Wall Street career as a financial analyst, working his way up the food chain within Wall Street. And starting in 2008, Tom assisted the U.S. government in understanding how insider trading occurred in the financial services industry. So as we're going to talk about, there were 4 trades in particular that leveraged or used insider trading information, and that sort of got Tom in some trouble with the FBI, and Tom then helped the FBI shed light on a very significant issue within Wall Street, where insider trading, especially in the mid 2000s, was rampant within within Wall Street, and Tom eventually became known as Tipper X. And he became one of the most prolific informants in securities fraud history. Again, shining a very bright light on the issue of insider trading within Wall Street. Tom pleaded guilty to his crimes, and now he is a global keynote speaker, corporate trainer, and board advisor on behavioral ethics, compliance, organizational conduct, and culture risk. So he has taken all of those learnings from his experience with the FBI and insider trading and trying to do good and trying to make sure people learn from those experiences. Now, there's one number for anybody listening here. There's one number that I want people to remember, because I think if there's a moral of the story, there's one number that is really going to shine a light or get people's attention. Because as we dig into the story, there were 4 trades in particular where Tom ran offside on. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, Tom was, again, one of the most helpful people in the history of the FBI in terms of helping prosecute insider trading and securities fraud. He must have profited millions of dollars off of these 4 particular trades. That must be the number. The amount of money that Tom profited off of 4 insider trades was $46,000 USD. Now that's pre-tax. Presumably that went up on your tax return, and the government maybe took half of it. They would have taken about half of it if you're up north of the border, Tom. Actually, perhaps even more than half. We love our nice high tax rates. But we're talking $46,000 is how much. Now, again, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Scott, you're trying to make a point here. You know, Tom must have committed these or did these trades back in the 1940s and the 1950s. He must be the youngest looking 90-year-old on the planet Earth, because Tom certainly doesn't look to be 80 or 90 years old. Well, these trades were not from the 1950s, but just to make sure, Tom, again, I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. What we're going to do is we're going to inflation adjust these numbers, because, again, I don't want to be, I want to be honest here in terms of the numbers. I don't want to be throwing out a number that people are going to criticize me and saying I'm just using it to make a point. So these trades occurred, let's call it in the mid 2000s. I think it was around 2008 where things finally came to a close. So what I did is I inflation adjusted the $46,000. And where that lands us now, if we were to take the 46 grand and inflation adjust it into our numbers today in 2024, the number today is $64,384.08 if you inflation adjust the $46,000 to today. So again, we are a long way away from Tom profiting millions and millions of dollars from countless insider trading that occurred. effectively, as we're going to talk about here, Tom's life was completely turned upside down for 46 grand pre-tax on 4 specific trades. What's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that the SEC, and perhaps more specifically the FBI, take insider trading very, very seriously. And you don't necessarily have to profit millions and millions of dollars in order to run afoul to the law. You can profit a lot lower than that. And if you get caught leveraging insider information in order to make a few dollars, you can run into a lot of problems. So again, as we continue this chat with Tom, I would encourage everybody to remember that number, $46,000. That is what we are talking about here. That is what Tom's entire life was turned upside down for, is 46 grand, which, Tom and I were talking before, in Wall Street world, that's nothing. That's, a dinner with the investment team after a successful year type of thing. $46,000 is, we're not talking a lot of money here. That's an expensive dinner for the team. So first of all, Tom, thank you again for joining us and taking the time today to talk about this issue of insider trading and your experience. But maybe if we roll the clock back a little bit, let's go back to the beginning. Where did you go to school, and how did you sort of first get interested in the world of financial services?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I'm an American. Grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. Father worked at Coca-Cola there. Coca-Cola man his whole 40-year career. Mother had a childcare business in our home. I was the oldest of 3 brothers, sort of middle class American family. Um, Back in the 1990s, when I applied to college, I applied to 3 schools. I wasn't really good at science or English, so that couldn't have left business. And so I went to the public library and figured out that the best business school I could apply to was called Wharton, the Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school. I applied early. I got waitlisted. I got deferred. And I finally got in. I joke, I think at that time in the 90s, they had a quota for people from Georgia. So I got into this very prestigious school. And right as I got there freshman year, sophomore year, um, I saw, my classmates were trading the stock market. They had been doing it since high school. And I got pretty enamored by just the fact that you could quantify your success or failure instantly. And at the time, we were still reading newspapers, the internet was new, and just sort of checking the stock quotes and reading about businesses in the Wall Street Journal, talking about situations in class, joining the stock picking club at Wharton, where alumni actually endowed us some capital to actually pitch investments and go through that process was really amazing. So I would say right in college, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. However, you usually have to start in investment banking or consulting. That's usually what you do for 2 or 3 years out of these big, um, you know, business schools. These Ivy League schools are feeder programs for these investment banks, which is basically like 100-hour work weeks. So it's sort of financial boot camp where you learn a lot. And I had planned to do that 2 or 3 years until one day a friend who worked at a hedge fund, and we could define that if you want to, in Connecticut, called me and had recruited me to join her at this hedge fund. And so now we're talking about 2000, 2001, kind of when the tech stock bubble was starting to implode.
So you start at the hedge fund. You're fresh out of college. What is the approach on how you're valuing investments and how you're picking stocks at that point? What's your approach when you're first coming out of college?
Yeah, so it was very much similar, sort of like how we learned in college, securities analysis, but it was more about looking at how much free cash flow these businesses could generate in 3 to 5 years. And so I was covering technology, so software, internet was still kind of new. Google went public in 2004. And so what we tried to figure out was Wall Street is very good at looking at what the business is going to earn in the next few quarters. Every analyst is focused on that. Very few people look beyond the next 12 months. So we would try to look at 3 years out, the free cash flow and the growth rate of that free cash flow. And if the business today maybe looked expensive on next year's numbers, but looked cheap 3 or 4 years out, we were able to have a variant perception on that. And we'd also look for markets where, maybe there were only 2% penetrated at the time and had the opportunity to grow to 20% penetration over time. So internet advertising, I mentioned Google, or e-commerce when Amazon, at that time was investing all their free cash flow into business. It didn't look like it had a lot. Salesforce.com was a new IPO then, where it was, just starting to talk about software as a service. And so those are opportunities that were very early. So that's how we looked at them. So it was sort of a long-term view, a 3 to 5 year view. What's the business worth? And did we have a variant perception? Because you couldn't just say, I read the 10K, and because that's what everybody else did. So you have to have a very perception. And we were very fond of founder CEOs. So Steve Jobs, Mark Benioff, I mentioned, at the time, Larry and Sergey at Google. And so really, if Constellation had been public in the mid 2000s, that probably would have been in our radar too. So,
And was it successful? Like in the early
oh yeah,
days of you're very successful.
yeah,
And
successful.
and when you look at some of the peers, like at what point did you realize that, some of the folks weren't necessarily playing by the rules? When did it kind of start to squeeze a little bit? Was it a function of the economy where the economy starts to turn? At what point did, that strategy kind of have difficulty holding up to and produce the same sort of returns that you had kind of had in the past?
Yeah, so we're talking, mid 2000s. Hedge funds routinely beat the stock market before, you know, the financial crisis, before the emergence of, FANG stocks or Mag 7 stocks, which we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, before, the global sort of interest rates cuts and that type of orchestration of interest rates and fueling the stock market. So back in the mid 2000s, I think the stock market was up maybe mid-single digits on average every year. And so you had the opportunity, if you pick the right stocks, to outperform. So I think the impetus to start looking for inside information was just trying to get that extra edge. Like everybody was doing well, everybody was beating the stock market, but by how much were you doing that? What kind of risk were you taking to do that? And could you find an edge? Edge was a big term back then. What is your edge? Okay, boss, I like Google, but like what's your edge beyond you like Google? Like what else do you know that somebody else doesn't know? And it can be very gray there where you're still playing by the rules, but you're sort of digging and digging and digging, and then eventually you can come into a situation where you're at that line and you receive or you're in receipt of illegal inside information.
So, and if I have it right, at some point you change jobs, right? You go from where you start to get a little bit more senior, you start to take on again a lot more just in terms of responsibilities. Maybe just talk a little bit about that transition where you sort of went from one spot to another.
Sure. So my second and final firm, I guess, is when I was 28 years old. So now in my late 20s, so several years of experience now. I received a phone call from a guy who I'd say was kind of my mentor in the industry. I think he was maybe 15 or 20 years older than me, saying that he had a meeting with a very famous investor, Julian Robertson of Tiger Management. So in the 2000s, Julian Robertson, George Soros, these were very big hedge fund names. Steve Cohen, these were kind of the big people in the space. He had met with Julian Robertson, and he was going to seed my mentor with capital to start his own hedge fund. Would I be interested in being not just his analyst, but also a junior partner at 28? And Scott, pretty much every kid I went to Penn with would have loved to have this phone call at 28. I kind of had
Absolutely.
status like, are you kidding me? I get to meet with this legend every week and pitch him stock ideas. Like, of course. And so I took on that role as the junior partner. So it was my mentor, myself, and we just went at it. So this is 2006 now, 2007, getting a little bit closer to the crisis. But this was just a great place to be. One of my best ideas that I never saw come to fruition was to be own Google, which I keep mentioning, and to be short yellow page stocks. So younger listeners won't know what we're talking about, but it used to be, I'm sure it's the same in Canada, these big books
Oh
that were
yeah.
delivered to our homes.
Oh
And
yeah.
you just kind of got the sense that these were probably not going to be around much longer. So the big thing about the hedge fund in tech is you have the disruptor and the disrupted. So you can own the disruptor and be short. So bet against, if people aren't familiar, you be short the stock. So yeah, long Google, short yellow pages would have made my career had I not done any insider trading. And that's all you need.
Yeah, those were good, certainly good, really good picks. And so what point did it start to turn? Again, you go to the new place, and are you using the same approach as that? You're looking at cash flows, you're trying to take a more long-term view. Is it the same sort of approach that you used at the previous firm that you're using at the new firm?
Same
And at this
approach.
point, are you using in terms of your edge, Is there
Mhm.
any insider information at this point? Do you think you're going offside on anything, or at this point you're just trying to keep it clean?
Just trying to keep it clean at this point, still looking at free cash flow 3 to 5 years out, and every 1 or 2 years, I mean, every once or twice a year in the market, there's a big dislocation because of some macro event where the S&P is down, 10% or whatever. That was our opportunity to wait patiently, do our research, and then come in and buy the stock. So it's still doing it that way. But Scott, I became aware that other my peers, my competition, were also trading on illegal inside information, so information that's material and non-public. And so this might look like the hedge fund would hire their stock analyst from a Silicon Valley company to be their analyst at their
Yep.
hedge fund, but with the understanding that you're going to call your old contacts at that company and learn about two major events in the market, M&A, so any M&A that company might be doing of other public companies, or their upcoming earnings announcements. So in the US, companies have to report every quarter, quarterly earnings calls. And if you know what the company is going to report for their revenue and earnings at the quarter, you have an edge, because a legal edge, because Wall Street has estimates. So if the company is going to beat those estimates or miss those estimates, you could be long or short the stock at these events 4 times a year. And it got to the point where there was a stat on suspicious trading in the US that the FT published. 60%, say maybe around 2006, 2007, 60% of companies before they were acquired had these unexplained spikes in the share price. So, Scott, you could see Merger Monday was a term. So every Monday morning there was a merger, and you'd see what company was acquired, what company is up 30, 40% Monday morning. Go back and look at that stock chart the week before. Every day it's going up. There's call option activity. So people are making leverage bets on the stock price. So this is going on. I remember I would talk with my boss, and we're like, we can't believe this is going on. Like, it would never be us, famous last words, but we can't believe this is happening. We're looking at these other guys that are sort of boasting that they have these contacts or these analysts who are giving them information. And so it kind of felt like, I know we talked about the term, like, cheating on your spouse, or it almost felt like speeding, where, um, you know, like adultery, hopefully not everybody's doing it, but kind of felt like speeding, like everybody does it. So
Yeah, yeah.
it almost felt like that it's obviously not being prosecuted. And we sort of just shake our heads and sort of back to work, because I wasn't actively looking for that type of information. I felt I didn't have those contacts. I'm an Excel monkey, just in my Excel, just sort of valuing these businesses and waiting for the stocks to sell off until one fateful moment, which I'm sure we'll get to. Yeah.
See, I like that speeding analogy, but my wife doesn't listen to this, so I'm going to go into this adultery thing. Hopefully she never listens to it, so I don't have to spend a few nights in the doghouse here. But researching this beforehand, I think adultery is still illegal in many states in the United States. If we take speeding, for example, if you're speeding and a police officer is sitting there with a speed gun and he catches you going over, 20 miles or whatever it is, chances are you're going to get pulled over and you're going to pay a ticket. So you acknowledge with speeding that even though everybody does it, if you get caught, you're probably going to have to pay something. See, the reason why I was using adultery as another example is because adultery in those US states is a crime. However, if you're caught committing adultery, they will never prosecute you because they don't have the time or the effort when they're prosecuting murderers and rapists and bank robbers and violent crimes and everything else. Part of it is I'm sure they don't have time to go and prosecute somebody who commits adultery, which again, definitely a moral sin, but is that really a criminal offense? Well, let's leave that for another day. And that's why, when you look at the folks on Wall Street who were, let's say, trading on insider information, were they thinking as well, thinking, look, even if I get caught, there's no way the FBI is going to hunt me down for 100 grand or whatever the number. It's just not worth their time. Do you think that was the FBI at that point, listening to phone calls and doing everything? Or at that point, really was it the Wild West which is different from speeding, where even if you got caught, the FBI, the SEC would just say, look, we don't have time to prosecute this. We're going after the Enrons or the WorldComs or whatever, whatever. What's your take on that, Tom? Like, were you
Yeah.
worried about, even if you got caught, it was like not a big deal?
Yeah. So, and I can only speak for myself. I never considered the idea of ever being caught, which people might think, well, that's weird. But to your point, I felt at the time the regulator wasn't focused on this. Obviously, my competition's been doing this for years. We could see it happening in the market. They were more focused on, like you said, those frauds around 2000s, or more focused on maybe retail pump and dump, sort of Wolf of Wall Street scam people,
Yep. Yep.
or more the organized white collar crime people. So they're not just focused on legitimate hedge funds or legitimate institutions. They wouldn't really be focused on that. And to your point, Scott, I had heard from other people that I knew were doing it. Hey, if I ever get that phone call from the SEC, you always think it's going to be a phone call. Hello, it's the regulator. Could you talk to us about insider trading? Just tell them, to your point, oh yeah, I bought that stock because I read this report that said, oh, if it was one of my trades was Hilton Hotels. Oh yeah, there was this report from Goldman Sachs that said hotels were cheap for private equity. I read that report, so you're backdating it. And then I bought the stock. And then apparently they would just hang up because they have so much to, okay, thank you for that, and keep going. So that was sort of like even the thinking. If you were to get an inquiry from the regulator, just make up some reason you bought the stock, have some documentation, an analyst report, or there's an article in the Wall Street Journal. Sometimes it would be like so and so's in play. Oh, that's why I bought it, and they'll leave you alone as long as you have that backed up. So that was my thinking too.
Yeah, because the other way to look at it as well, if you're trying to rationalize this, is that it's a victimless crime. Again,
Mhm.
if you look at speeding as an example, why were they going to stop people for speeding? Well, presumably, if somebody goes 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, there's a much higher risk of a car accident and you potentially running into somebody else and killing them. Now, if you take insider trading and somebody were to profit 75 grand off an insider trade, and you know that everybody else is doing it, who's actually hurt at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Right? Because again, a lot of the people who are actually trading are, and like you say, Tom, it's different than say, one of my favorite movies. Again, you quoted Wolf of Wall Street just for fun. I'm going to quote another one is Boiler Room, another
Mhm.
fantastic movie with with Ben Affleck. Um, they are actually stealing money from people where these are not real companies. They are actually stealing money from people. But in the case of insider trading, to some extent, it's a victimless crime, right? Where nobody, and I guess if it was me, I could certainly see myself rationalizing to say, look, if everybody else is doing it, again, who's actually really getting hurt at the end of the day?
That's you hit on the correct point. You totally feel like it's victimless. I'm just buying it before everybody else is going to buy it. The victim, the way that the law talks about it, the victim is the company whose information was misappropriated, but you don't really feel guilty. I mean, you don't feel like, oh, I'm hurting. It's very easy, again, to rationalize. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just buying it for everybody else. The person that sold me the stock that I bought was going to sell it anyways, regardless or not. So I'm just in there. And it's interesting. It's prosecuted as securities fraud in the US, the same as a Ponzi scheme. And I would argue a Ponzi scheme is much, much different. Like I'm
100%,
taking your money
100%,
and you're not getting it back. And so
100%.
that fuels the rationalization for the insider trader. To your point, you nailed it.
And maybe just talk a little bit about too, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this, is the pressure that you're under. You talked about earlier, what is the beauty of Wall Street? The beauty of Wall Street is that your performance is very quantifiable. Is that there's no gray in terms of how good of a year Tom Hardin had on the floor. Is they're going to take a look at your return and it'll be either good, average or poor. Um, and I could imagine that is going to create a lot of pressure for the team members. Maybe just talk a little bit about that because presumably that is playing into things as well, where, you can talk about taking a long-term view using cash flows and saying, hey, look, I'm going to look over the next 3 to 5 years. But on the flip side, presumably you're preparing quarterly financials for your investors and they might not be too happy if, they're losing 10% per quarter. And the view was, well, don't worry, in 3 years, it's going to turn around. Maybe just talk a little bit about that because clearly that would have added to, we're going to get into a second here, just talking about when things turn, but presumably the pressure is certainly something, again, in my job, I don't have to deal with that sort of pressure where it's like every single quarter, it's just not the same thing. Maybe just talk a little bit about that because I think that's an important factor that's going to drive people to maybe, push the edges or go offside.
Yeah, the pressure is intense, as you mentioned. You can see every day how your stocks are doing. And so, um, like you said, we would look a couple years out, but really, if our investors are only locked up, if we only have their capital for 12 months, they're actually getting monthly updates. And so
Yeah.
might be investing longer term, but if you have a few bad months, the phone's ringing, you're being looked at my first firm. If I had a bad month or two, my boss would say, I could always hire the next kid at a fancy Ivy League school. So, figure it out or you're disposable. But I did like it because, like you said, it was like a meritocracy. There was my first firm, it was 12 analysts. You kind of felt like an NBA team as long as you hit your shots, so long as you pick the right stocks, you're going to be compensated. If you don't, you'll be fired. I kind of like that accountability. It wasn't like playing BS politics inside of a company. Just like, here it is what it is. But it also, there's tremendous pressure. And it got to the point where at my second firm, we can get into it, where we actually lost money in the first quarter, which was a big thing for my boss when, I just told you we were investing over, a 3-year horizon. He comes into my office after that first quarter. I think he had been talking to one of our investors and maybe chewed him out or something. He was very frazzled. And he's like, look, I know we're investing over these 3 to 5 years, valuing businesses, but we just lost money in the first quarter. We have to start looking for shorter term opportunities to make money every month, or we may not survive. And so if anybody listening, like if your goals and anything you do go from 3 years to monthly, I mean, the opportunity to start looking for ways to at least cut corners certainly increases. And I also say, just to finish this thought, that the ambiguity in his message to me to do what it takes to meet shorter term targets, and me looking back, not asking any clarifying questions. Okay, do you mean we're going to stay within the ethical and legal guardrails, or if I were to be in receipt of this information, which we know other people are doing, I'm going to trade it. I didn't ask any clarifying questions. I just assumed anything goes at that point. So that's why I think I was sort of conditioned to what would happen just a few months later.
So maybe let's get to that then, because, so again, the environment that's being created is one high pressure, and they're not necessarily providing, like you say, clarity on what's in bounds and what's out of bounds, especially in an environment where insider trading is kind of seen as part of the process. It's not necessarily seen as a huge issue. Now, all of a sudden, again, the economy is starting to turn. It's getting a heck of a lot harder to generate returns. So maybe just talk about, again, you start to go down that slippery slope. When did it cross into, okay, you know what, now what I'm doing is offside? When did that point occur?
So only a few more months after that meeting with my boss, I received a phone call from another analyst. Um, I had suspected, so I knew her for a few years. I had suspected she was probably trading on inside information in her own account. She had worked for technology companies in the 1990s. She had worked for a guy named Roger Rotnam, who was probably later the most famous person to be charged in these cases in the U.S., Sri Lankan billionaire. I think he just wrote a book recently. And so we knew he was doing it. She calls me. She had been working for him. And she says, look, Tom, again, everybody's doing this. I just received some information. The tipping chain, the way that she laid it out, was that she had a younger cousin who had just out of college, so had 4 roommates in New York. One of his roommates worked at Moody's, the bond rating agency. And so his clients were private equity companies that buy businesses. And so she learned that the Moody's analyst told her cousin that a company, Kronos, a public company, was going to be acquired in a few weeks. Here's the date. Here's the price. Here's the private equity firm. Scott, it doesn't get much more stark than that. Like up to that point, she was always full of rumors. Like, I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that. But she would never give me the information because I would have to reciprocate. Like, why would I tell you something unless I knew that if
100%.
you're in the business, we could have this relationship like a quid pro quo? And so I guess I'd made her a bunch of money over the years of my best ideas, these longer term ideas that she's like, here's a gift. And it often is a gift. It's not, why'd she tip me, just sort of a gift of information. But my moral compass was still intact. I remember thinking, well, this is like, it sounds illegal, so I'm not going to trade this, at least on that day. But then later that day, my phone rings, and it's a friend who works at a prop trading firm, just to explain that you only actually get paid that month if you're up that month. So it's a very short-term focused firm.
Wow.
He's like, we're just catching up. And he's like, dude, I'm having a bad month. Are you hearing anything I could take a flyer on? So a flyer means like a small stock position, just something you're speculating. And I'm like, look, I'm not trading this, but if you want to trade this, it's fine. This woman just told me, Moody's analyst Kronos, just right there, so people are clear. I've now violated insider trading laws, I think in the US and Canada, by tipping. And so now I'm tipping illegal information to him. I could now be sued, at least by the regulator, for insider trading. And I haven't even traded yet. I tipped him the information. And apparently he tells his entire firm, within the hour, the head trader at his firm buys 500,000 shares of this stock on my phone call and buys call options. And so I see the stock start to tick up after my phone call. I'm kind of a little bit nervous at that point, like, oh my God. But then I go back to work. I'm like, I'm not, this is something I don't do. I'm still, that moral compass is still trying to hold there. And then maybe a week later, we're talking and the stock has moved up a few dollars. And I am checking it every morning. I'm like, oh God, these guys are going to make money on this. The woman that called me told me her entire broker's account was in this stock. I remember
Wow.
thinking like, that's probably stupid, but that's okay. And then he calls me back. He's like, are you in? Like you said, this is going to happen in the next week or two. And so when the employee commits fraud, there's something called a fraud triangle where there's the need to commit the fraud. So the need was actually there for short-term performance. There was the rationalization, which we kind of touched on. Everybody's doing this, victimless. But the opportunity is the third reason. And the opportunity for me to even buy this stock at my company was I could buy a stock in our portfolio and not have to talk to my boss as long as it was less than 1% of the money that we manage for clients. So that might be a starter position. Hey, this is an interesting idea. I'm going
Yep.
to buy a little bit and do some more work on it. So Scott, I calculated and bought a 0.9% position in the portfolio in Chronos. So talk about not swinging for the fences, actually not trying to make a bunch of money. I think just playing along and sort of a sense of FOMO, like, oh my God, these guys are going to make millions. She's going to make millions. I'll play along a little bit. Totally rationalized, as I said. I said, I'll just do it once, which is never, it's not just this once. I'll do it one time. You know what? Maybe it's a rumor. Like it sounded like specific information from her, but she could be full of crap. Like maybe she's just making this up to make herself look like she knows something, and maybe that's not true because she's never called me with something so explicit. This is like the old movie Wall Street, Blue Horseshoe. This is just to date that movie from the '80s. Like, I mean, like when I talked to colleges today, I'm like, imagine the answers to the test just fell into your lap. Like this is exactly what happened. So I'll play along a little bit. And I kind of felt like if my boss had a problem, he'd be like, hey, what's this Kronos
Yeah.
company? Like, just tell me more about your research here. The boss never asked questions. And I look at all the factors, the opportunity, the rationalizations. I think one big takeaway for people to think about is I made a decision in isolation, like this idea of isolated decision making, did not talk to my boss, didn't get any help from compliance. That wasn't going to start, but didn't talk to anybody else at my firm, made that decision on my own to cross that line. It does often happen with people doing this where you make assumptions, you don't challenge the ambiguity in the
Yep.
boss's message, and you think, okay, this is okay, I'm not hurting anybody. And that confluence of factors, that's what led up to that first trade.
So you make the trade and you make a little bit of cash. Let me just ask a question. So let's say the SEC calls you and say, like Tom, what's going on here? Is a defense not well? These are just rumors. Like you're hearing the second and third hand. How can you mentioned that you committed a crime before you even made a nickel? Is that just by sharing that information you committed a crime? But wouldn't a defense be, you know, it's no different than reading some quote in some backwards magazine that nobody else has ever read. What's the difference, right? What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, so when I placed the trade, I'm still not sure this is actually going to happen. Then 2 weeks later, it happened exactly as she said. So then I thought, oh my God, I better have a reason because, like you said, the phone might ring from the SEC. I don't know, like in a day or two. And so I look back, and you nailed it again. I just thought, well, I could say this. She called me. She's full of rumors. I think it's a rumor. She just said I'm hearing. Like they wouldn't know exactly what she told me, so I could just tell the SEC. She said there was some rumor about this company. Obviously, I didn't load up about a small position. Look at all the other sort of flyer small positions I've done over the years on just rumors, which was actually a common pattern. Rumors are very common. So if I already had like a view on the company and there was a rumor out there that something might happen, we might buy a little bit just because you never know. And if it doesn't happen, you just sell it. Like it doesn't matter. So exactly, that's what I was thinking. If my phone were to ring from the SEC, oh, these are rumors. Now, I did break the law. Now, whether they could prove this or not, because I knew, okay, the actual acquire, the date, the price. So somebody, that Moody's analyst, had misappropriated their duty to their client to not share this information. But that's sort of down in the weeds of how the law works. So if they could have proven all that, then, you know, I would have been proven guilty. But yeah, at the time, I was going to say just a rumor. She's full of rumors.
So you do well on this one.
Hmm.
And then now we know that there's 4 trades in total. How did things play out after the first trade? So again, you kind of had your moral compass. You're a little bit concerned. Everything goes through. You've got your counterparties there on the who blew it out to their whole firm.
Yeah.
One for one, everything seems to go okay. How do things play out after that one trade?
So the morning it happens, it was a Friday morning before the stock market opens. Stock's up 30, 40%. A few hours later, she calls me and she's like, I hope you loaded up. I'm like, oh, I just took a flyer. I just bought a little bit. And she's like, my entire brokerage account was in that stock for this event. I remember saying like, I don't think that's probably not a smart idea that you teach that. She's like, nah, everybody's doing this. But she said that Moody's analyst, Tom, I gave him your name. Could you write him a check for, I think it was like $10,000? You can't imagine. So I rationalized the trade, but I thought, holy whatever, like that's highly illegal to be doing. So now my moral compass, it went away a little bit on the trades and now it came back in. I would never do that. Oh, come on. He's going to be in New York next week. He's going to have more in these. And I'm like, all right, let me think about this. I hung up. All the guys that my friend I had tipped, I'm like, here's the situation. They were like ecstatic. They're like, when's the next one? It was sort of like get the drugs going. When's the next hit? I'm like, here's the situation. If you guys want more of these, and he's like, no problem. Apparently, I don't know how he does this. He gets cash together. Um, I meet him at a train station in New York. He has this FedEx envelope with 10,000 in cash. He slides it to me. I walk outside. There's a guy on the corner who's the Moody's analyst. He's going to meet me at this corner. He says, "Are you Tom?" I just hold up the FedEx envelope. I don't even look at him. I'm so disgusted with myself. And to check your ethical compass, if you're doing something that your grandmother would be really disappointed you're doing, that's probably a good
Absolutely.
place to start. So it went from a small trade to handing cash to a guy on the street. There's really no coming back from that in terms of that, how far, I went down.
See, now again, I'm going to ask another question that may get myself into trouble. Like, that guy did it all for 10 grand? Like, unless the guy is doing this, 30 times a month, like you're going to sacrifice your whole career for, again, I'm sure it's more than one. Obviously in his role at Moody's, I'm sure he gets a lot of, but there's only so many times you can do this. I'm actually surprised it was only 10 grand that the guy did this for.
He might have
That
been
if you're going
talking
to
to
do this,
people.
maybe it'd be
Yeah.
100 grand, right? Now it would have been, I guess,
Yeah.
more difficult to gather 100 grand in cash, but 10 grand actually seems pretty low.
Yeah. And he might have had other so-called clients for this little side hustle that he had going on. He actually is the only, so 80 people were later arrested. He's the only person that fled the country and was never found. I believe he was from
Really?
India and went back to India. And um, and so I think he just felt he's 22, his roommates, he can take him to Atlantic City, for a weekend for the 10,000 just to have some fun. But he wasn't really thinking about, what it was actually worth to these hedge funds that trade on this. So, but that happened. And then, so it happened 3 more times. Like she would call 0.9% positions. On the third trade, it was Hilton Hotels was going to be acquired by Blackstone. I'm sorry, the third trade was Google was going to miss Wall Street's estimates for the first time since their IPO. Google used a third-party investor relations firm to put together their press releases. An employee here went rogue. Of course, this employee knew the person that was calling me and wanted $15,000. I told those guys again, here's the situation, got me the cash. I'm actually flying to California to give this to her. I'm going to airport security in New York. I was so kind of scared, so I put the money, tucked it into my shirt, my pockets, and my socks. Go through the airport screening machine, get through the screening machine. Now this is 2007, so it's not like the ones where you stick up your arms and spread your legs today and it spins around. So got through that metal detector, I guess it was. Went to the restroom, took the cash off my body, put it in the bank envelopes in my carry-on bag. There's actually two security agents at the gate of my flight stopping passengers randomly just to check carry-ons. I thought, oh my God, they saw me on the camera. I'm sure they're going to stop me. My flight is called to board. I'm walking up, tried not to make eye contact. One of the security agents says, hey, could you step over? We're going to just check your carry-on. I'm like, oh, great. So the female agent actually touches the bank envelopes. She looks at the other guy and she looks at me and she says, sir, have a nice flight. So,
Wow. And it is at that time, it wouldn't have been illegal to at least be holding that amount of cash, right?
right.
Because I've heard you talk about
That's
this
right.
on different
Right.
podcasts before.
Right.
That carrying 15
Yeah.
grand on a plane, apparently at that point in time, wasn't illegal. But I could imagine the stress that you'd be going through, like you'd be freaking out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Like I didn't know that domestically in the US, apparently I could have just said, oh, I'm going to Las Vegas and I'm a big poker player or whatever. And this is normal. But I thought at the time it was illegal. So that's why I think I played it up. I didn't want to have that conversation anyways about, let me explain this cash I'm carrying. So, because I
And
told her when I got to California, I said, I'm never doing this again. These cash payoffs, I'm so disgusted with myself. I would never, you can just stop calling me because I'm not, I'm out. I'm out. You know, did it 3 times. I'm out. She would call me one more time with one final sort of trade. One thank you. That was it. 4 trades.
did you have to pay on the fourth trade or no more
I did
cash
not. I
payments on
told
the
her I'm
fourth?
not. She was like, I was like, you take care of that one. So, so whatever she did. So it was 4 trades. I didn't escalate the trading. It was all 0.9% positions. And through all these trades, you know, my boss and I are going through our portfolio of 20, 25 stocks. Only two people can cover about that many stocks. The stocks are all up 30, 40% on these events. Not once did he ask me any questions. He said, oh, it's one of those. And went to the next stock in our portfolio. So we went back and talked about rationalization and mentors or not having a great mentor in my 20s. That further fueled the rationalization. He's not asking me. So if these keep falling into my lap, I'll keep doing it because he's not saying anything. So he thinks it's fine. So that fueled it more.
So 4 trades, and you're hopefully you're kind of at a point now where doing these cash payments and stuff, you're kind of hopefully done with them. And then this is where examples of truth are almost stranger than fiction. Because if I got this right, is that you're walking now downtown New York and you hear somebody from behind you say, "Are you Thomas Covey Hardin?" And again, for everybody listening, if you are addressed by your full name, including your middle name, it's probably indicative that there's going to be an issue. It's either the FBI or you're probably being served some court papers, which you don't really want to be served. So at that point, I can imagine you turn around and you see these two people in suits, and you're probably freaking out, saying, "Yes, I'm that person." And this is where truth now gets stranger than fiction, is they say to you, let's go to Wendy's and talk about this. Now, I don't know if it was me, I'd be thinking like when you say Wendy's, like, do you mean like some secret FBI headquarters or something like that? And they say, no, like Wendy's, the restaurant. Like that
Yeah.
just seems a bit, it almost seems surreal, Tom, that they would be using Wendy's. Now, that said, we just wrapped up an interview a couple weeks ago with an informant who went undercover with the Hells Angels. Their meeting place was the Waffle House. That
Oh,
was
yeah.
their so maybe Wendy's is the FBI choice of but if we just set the stage here, like you put that in your mind and saying, okay, I'm being approached by the FBI. I'm freaking out. Again, if this was me, like my heart would fall out of my chest. I'd be like covered in sweat. And now you're going to walk into a Wendy's
Yeah.
and you're going to go, you're going to go stand in line to get a coffee or something like that. Like, it's just crazy. So this is why I just got a couple of questions about this. You could almost write a movie about this whole Wendy's meeting. So, like, who picked Wendy's? Like, is this like, did the FBI suggest somewhere else and you said, no, like I'd prefer to go to Wendy's?
So the way it happened was I was leaving my apartment to drop off dry cleaning that morning in Manhattan, and right next to my dry cleaner happened to be a Wendy's, and so I think they were waiting for me to drop off that dry cleaning. I stepped out of the dry cleaner, and the guy behind me said, "Are you Thomas Covey Hardin?" And as a growing up in the South in the U.S., if your mother ever called you by your full name, you knew you were in trouble, as you mentioned. So this was a big thing for me. Like nobody said that full name to me other than when I was like 10 years old. My mother was about to spank me. So I turned around and he's like, I'm like, yes. And he's like, let's go sit down here. So I think the Wendy's just happened to be by the dry cleaner. I do like the baked potato, but it wasn't, it wasn't time for that for the salad bar. So we actually did not eat anything. My stomach was kind of in knots. So we just went upstairs. It was some of these restaurants in New York, they have two stories. So we went upstairs and there was like a homeless guy sleeping at one table and we sat on the other side. But all I remember was the interrogation from the FBI at that point.
Like to do it in a
Yeah.
Wendy's again, it just
Yeah.
seems you would have thought that they would maybe pick a more discreet location to have the
Right.
conversation of your life,
Right.
as
Yeah. That's a good
opposed
point.
to as like, did the FBI get anything to eat at the Wendy's, or you guys just went upstairs and kind of just grabbed a table without even buying anything to eat?
We just went upstairs and grabbed the table without buying anything to eat. So we were not approached by, management to order something. I think they could have flashed their badges and got management to go away. But I think he was looking just for a space to sit down and talk, and nobody was there at 6:30 in the morning upstairs. So that's where we sat down. But you think it might have been like a black town car or something parked on the side of the street that we would talk. But we chatted at Wendy's, but there was nothing. Yeah, did not order anything to eat.
And so how did the conversation go? Like, what were you again, I could
So
imagine you were freaking. If it was me, I would
yeah,
like, again, I'd be out of my mind at this point.
so they said we know about your four trades, which I was thinking like, wow, like they know about those four small trades. Like at the time, I didn't even know how much money I personally made. The 46,000 was much later that I found that out. And then they said, we know, Tom, you were just down in Georgia last weekend visiting your baby nephew for his baptism, and they knew his name. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And they said, my first thought, Scott, was, oh my God, my dad's going to kill me. What's he going to say? All he could talk about was my
Yeah.
success. And I'm still young in my 20s, still very close with my parents, talk to them all the time. Oh my gosh, they're going to be so disappointed. And then I thought, wait a minute, I just got married last year. My wife's going to leave me. Like she had no idea I did these trades. She's going to think I don't even know who this guy is I married. She's leaving me. And then it finally got to, oh my God, this might impact my career. Oh my God, am I going to prison? So it went from just thinking about my parents and my wife to possible prison time. And I didn't even let him finish talking. I started making implicating statements. I made the four trades. I just started confessing. In fact, there was these cash payoffs, and he opens his pen. He's like, "Oh, that's interesting. Go on, go on." I wasn't playing tough guy, like prove it, guys. Prove it. Or I wasn't. It wasn't like the mafia, where like, hey, let me talk to my defense attorney on speed dial. I didn't have a defense attorney on speed dial. I was never prepped for this situation. I always felt if the SEC, who's not law enforcement, it would have been the SEC, who's the regulator, they would have given me a phone call and I would have had my reasons made up for these purchases. I was planning for that day, not law enforcement on the street saying they knew all this about me. So I start making all these implicating statements. They're writing it all down. I'm not sure what they knew. And they said, okay, there was a female agent who was sort of like playing good cop. She's put her hand on my hand. She's like, okay, settle down. Are you aware this is going on Wall Street? And I kind of looked at them sideways, like, how do you not know this is going on? But they always ask you questions they know the answers to, and I'm like, yeah, this is rapidly going on. And they pull out this web of names of I saw it very quickly. The names were whited out, but if you ever look at insider trading cases, it's this web of like arrows and circles. They tipped them, they traded, and so there was two big targets at the top, and I saw I was way down here at the bottom, like kind of a minnow, and this vast ocean of insider trading. And they folded up. The mail agent gives me his card. He says, you can help us out on these cases. Tom, right now it's going to help you out. I said, guys, should I talk to an attorney first? And it clicked for me. They said, we'll let you know when you can do that. So they're not supposed to say that, actually. Once you bring up attorney, then you can just say, well, we can't help you here, but yeah, you have the right to do that. So I took his card. They actually walked me out of the Wendy's, and they actually hailed a cab for me because they were worried that I would just walk into traffic because I was not functioning. My brain was just,
Absolutely.
gone the worst day of my life. And so
Absolutely.
they actually held me on the sidewalk, held a taxi for me, and I went to the office. I was late, but I had some excuse, and my face was totally white, but it was the financial crisis, so my face was white every day. Went to work, and so my boss didn't really ask too many questions. And then I had converted to Catholicism to get married a year before, and so I thought this would be a great day for confession. Went to the big cathedral there in Manhattan, St. Patrick's, at my lunch sort of hour. Got in line. There was this long line for confession on a Tuesday afternoon. I thought, how many of these guys in line are hedge fund guys? Got
It's not a
and
sin
so
though,
I,
right? Like that's the thing.
yeah,
There would be no hedge fund guys there because they would
right,
look at it and say, "This isn't a crime."
right, exactly. I'm not.
46 grand. This is
Yeah,
nothing, right? This is par for the course. This isn't a crime.
yeah. So I think for me, like, I don't know if it was the right decision at the time, but I thought, you know what, I got caught. I knew that I wasn't going to try to defend myself or flee the country or do anything like that. I knew what I did was wrong and illegal, and you know, I'm going to start making hopefully the right decisions at that point to make the best out of the situation I can. And I spoke to the priest because I don't know if I was suicidal, but it was my darkest thoughts. And the priest just said, "Hey, your penance is to basically help the FBI. If you're telling me the industry's all corrupt and these people are doing it, you should help them out." And so I think that priest maybe saved my life or at least put me on the path. Now, I should have talked to an attorney also, but I talked to a
Yeah.
priest anyways. And so I called the FBI and said, you know, what do you mean help? I was so naive. I wasn't thinking about how do I help? Got lunch with them. They had this small recording. They had this small piece of metal at lunch. They said, you're going to have to wear this. And that's when we still had Blackberries. And so I'm like, is that a Blackberry battery? They're like, no, this is a recording device. I'm like, a body wire? Like, yeah, you're going to have to wear this on people of interest. But the people, usually you would have to wear a wire on your buddy that you actually, like a friend or something.
Yeah.
But apparently he had already worn a wire on me. And the woman who had called me had worn a wire on me a week before the FBI approached me. She had met me in New York and said, Tom, what would you say if you were ever asked, Tom, you know, this is illegal insider trading? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I know, I know. And she's kind of leaning in closer. So they both got me. And so I had this open playing field. Well, who are the worst actors? And I told the FBI, I mean, these are like 48-year-old hedge fund centillionaire guys. This is not my social sphere, but maybe I can build relationships. And so that was my job, my second job for the next couple of years to get people in conversations and set up these situations to have those conversations.
And why do you think people would be willing to share that information? Like even you had mentioned e- when she had asked you, is this illegal or whatever the magic words are that they need you to admit on the wire. Why do you think people are willing to share that information? Do you think it's just human nature that they want to find someone to talk about it, or what do you think the reason is?
So, look, the setup for me, if we had a target, there was a big hedge fund manager in Silicon Valley who I helped them with. So we'd set up the meeting. Maybe I knew an analyst that worked for the guy and say, hey, it's 2008. Things are not going well, which is not a crazy thing to be saying. I'll probably be looking for a job. I'd love to move to California and I'd love to meet with your boss. And so they connect me. I'm going to be in California for a conference and let's meet at a coffee shop. And so at this coffee shop, I'd say, look, I'd have to be pretty sure that this company is also trading inside information. And I'd say, hey, my edge, so going back to this term, my edge, how am I different than any other guy you would talk to, any other 29-year-old analyst, is I knew about these four trades last year. I'd play up these connections. Hey, I know somebody who works at Moody's. I mean, I didn't know them, but I have connections to them. Or, hey, I know about this person who knew about Google and play up those connections. Um, and then eventually people would sort of give me something like, oh, I also have a contact at this company. This is how I do it. But it didn't happen in the first conversation because usually if you don't know me that well and you're interviewing me and I'm asking you about times that you also broke the law, you might not want to talk about that to your point and change the subject. And it was so awkward in the face-to-face meetings. The two FBI agents would already be there, say in the coffee shop when I showed up for this meeting, like on the other
Wow.
side. So obviously I don't make eye contact, but I can see them there. So I'm kind of nervous. And I think they did that so I wouldn't slide the target a piece of paper saying I'm wearing a wire, don't talk to me. So I understood why they did that. And then I'd wait for the target to leave, thanks for the meeting. I'd always change the subject. I was so nervous if they didn't say what kind of context they had. I just changed the subject and just I wasn't comfortable with silence. And then the target would leave. I'd give them the recording device once we were clear the guy was gone. And then a day or two later, they would debrief me. Tom, you did a terrible job. You were not letting the guy talk. And I'd say, hey guys, it's my first time doing this. There was
Yeah,
no
well, it's not like you
training.
had a month of
Yeah,
training
yeah,
on how to do this. You were just kind of
right.
thrown right into the fire,
Yeah,
right? Like that,
yeah,
like it was just like off you go.
yeah. Thrown right into the fire. And eventually, I got comfortable with that silence. Like it's a weird thing to bring up. I tried to bring it up during the conversation. Hey, I know about these four trades. How do you do it? Or phrase it some way. And by the second or third conversation, maybe that was a follow-up phone call conversation, I would get that was recorded. I'd get enough just where they'd say they have a contact here, so and so, tipping them information on a certain stock, and that was all the FBI needed, just that one sort of nugget. And they tell me, Tom, your work is done here. You don't need to talk to this person anymore. So maybe they would approach them like they approach me and still try to keep building the cooperators and build these cases.
And at what point did you realize, as you kind of transition from, Tom Hardin to Tipper X, at what point did you realize, hey, like I'm actually really good at this. Like this is something where we're actually doing meaningful work in terms of shining a light on a major issue that exists within Wall Street. Was there a kind of a aha moment where you'd said, you know what, like I'm actually quite good, or was it just more of a transition over time?
It was a transition over time. The FBI, if you can just picture sort of stone-faced, emotionless FBI agents, they weren't really telling me if I was good or not. I guess they would tell me when I was bad, but they weren't really saying this is going anywhere or you can stop talking to this person. Maybe that was enough. You got Tom, but we don't really know. And it wasn't honestly, Scott, until the fall of 2009, the first 20 arrests happened on Wall Street. All these guys they called them perp walks, where they show up at your house or your apartment at 6 in the morning with the FBI windbreakers, and the news cameras just happen to be there. Some
Yep.
are tipped off, and so all these hedge fund guys are in handcuffs. And I remember when the FBI agents called me because this happened. This is after I left my firm because I thought my name might be coming out. I wasn't sure. I didn't know I was Tipper X until in the Wall Street Journal it had all these names, and there was one name in the middle of all these names called Tipper X. And I'm like, "Am I Tipper X?" They're like, "That's you. By the way, Tom, you should talk to an attorney now." so,
Who came up with the
so,
name Tipper X, Tom? Who actually
so
coined the term?
there was actually an enforcement attorney at the SEC. So the SEC works with the FBI together. I didn't know this till years later. A hedge fund hired me to talk to their employees, and the general counsel at the hedge fund said, "Tom, I'm not sure you know this, but I actually named you Tipper X." I'm like, "All right, you're not asking for royalties on my speaking business, are you?"
Exactly.
so, so- but it was actually a fun. I mean, not a fun, but like a full circle moment where he told his analysts and traders, Tom didn't know this before he got here, but when he was at the SEC, he actually named me Tipper X. So that was but my company name, there was an X in the name of the company, and that's where they
I
took it
see.
from. But I'm happy I wasn't Tipper Y. I'm not sure if I'd have a speaking business now. So,
And you talk a little bit about your craziest moment wearing a wire.
oh God.
You gotta walk us through this one, Tom, because this is again the truth is stranger than fiction. But as you guys are going to find out listening, the person you talk to is actually a pretty smart guy. So maybe
Yes.
just walk us through, the situation with maybe your craziest moment wearing a wire.
So one of the guys high up the FBI's list, probably I got him in 15 of these conversations, face-to-face coffees or lunches or on the phone. He would always change the subject. Anytime I got close to saying, hey, how do you do this? I have these Ford trades. He was just on to me. One Sunday afternoon, about a year into my cooperation, he calls me. He's like, Tom, we need to have dinner tonight. We need to talk. Sunday afternoon, like it has to happen today. Okay. So I called the FBI and said, the guy way up the list here just called, and here's the situation. They got super excited. They met me at the train station in New York, gave me the recording device. And I always had a shirt with a front pocket where it would just sit in that front pocket. He lived in the suburbs in Connecticut. So I took the train out to his town. He picks me up at the train station and he says, hey, Tom, good to see you. I brought some swim trunks for you. Before we have dinner, we're going to go swimming at my mother's house. Now, The Sopranos, that show was popular that summer, so I would say these ideas were going through my head. But I was still
Absolutely.
actually able to play it cool as far as being comfortable wearing the wire. I was still my heart rate was elevated at that point, but I thought, okay, we'll go swimming. But how am I going to get out of this? We walk into this old mansion in this town, and we walk into this like bedroom. I don't know if it was his like childhood bedroom or something. It was awkward. He starts disrobing. I'm like, dude, I'm gonna go to the restroom and get changed. And so I was able to get out of that. I took the wire to my shirt, put it in my jeans, and these swim trunks on he had for me. I put those on. So now the two of us are walking out to this pool. It was so dark. I saw like a shovel against the house, a hole in the ground. I thought,
Wow.
oh my God, is this guy gonna
Yeah.
try to kill me? And then he had some like plants he was planting. So okay, landscaping. And then we got into the pool, and one of the most awkward things is he grabs a tennis ball, and so we're playing this awkward game of catch. I was just thinking, what the hell is going on? And he said, Tom, I had been acting kind of weird for a while, which I guess I had. He had spoken to a defense attorney or some kind of attorney, and the attorney said, "Oh, Tom must be wearing a wire. Ask him this question, and he has to answer truthfully." I'm not sure if I really had to answer truthfully, but I was going to give it my cover right there. I just want to go on the train and go home. So what do you want to know, man? He's like, all right, have you been approached by the SEC, who's the regulator? And truthfully, up to that point, it was law enforcement, the FBI. So I tried to get him a hint. I said, no, not the SEC. And he's like, all right, I just had to make sure you weren't wearing a wire. And then we just start talking. He starts telling me everything the FBI wanted to know, but it wasn't recorded. And he was actually never charged by the FBI or the SEC. And up until a few years ago, he was still managing money for outside investors, outside clients, but he never had me in as a guest speaker at his hedge fund for compliance trainings.
Wow, look, that guy could teach a master class in
Yeah.
avoiding prosecution because at the end of the day, what he did was probably what every other person should have done is go into a public pool or a private pool, I guess, and had those conversations in swim trunks. Like he almost, there's maybe a paranoia where it just shows you maybe how criminal the guy really was. Is that
Yeah.
his offenses were so off the rails
Yeah.
that he felt that he had to go through that whole process because he was so concerned about what you know the potential downfall that he could have, right?
Yeah. I think he probably thought it was taped to my chest, and he was pretty clever in that tactic. And I didn't know until years later that the FBI actually had driven up in the black town car and were parked right across the street from his house because they thought it was out of the ordinary request. But if he had a gun or something, what were they going to do parked across the street? So,
Were you worried a little bit about it turning violent?
oh
With one of
yes,
these,
yeah,
yeah, like this was, obviously in a Wendy's, maybe it's not going to happen, but presumably, depending on where you're having these meetings, um, it could turn violent at any time, I guess, right?
yeah. There was one. So the swimming pool thing was the scariest. I'm not a good swimmer, so just like I don't know, like just not
Push you
comfortable
under,
in the
that's the
pool.
end,
Yeah,
right?
exactly right. So I probably would lose a fight in the pool because I'm just not comfortable with treading water or whatever, or get drowned. And there was another conversation with one of these hedge fund guys in Silicon Valley where I was in his we were hanging out for a bit, and he was took me to where he has his wine stored. So we're sort of in these big wine storage places by ourselves, and we're having that conversation. It was just awkward because he was looking at me, nobody was around. We're in this wine storage facility where, he could have had somebody waiting for me or something. I don't know. So we were having the conversation. I changed the subject because I just felt it was too awkward. But there were points where I was sort of concerned about my safety. But the FBI, they gave me the assurance that they had vetted all these targets and I was fine. But who really knows what they did?
Because the wire you were wearing, it wasn't like it was purely for recording purposes. It
Right.
wasn't as if the FBI could actually hear what was being said. So if it was going to turn violent at some point, you were pretty much screwed, right? Like there was
Yeah.
nobody listening to come and save the day. It would have been really up to you to get out of Dodge as quickly as possible, I guess, right?
Yeah. At that time, it's not like the movies now where they're listening in the van, contemporaneously. It's at the time they would listen to it later. So you're right. They would have no idea how the situation escalated or what was going on. They always said to call them. But I mean, yeah.
So now I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Is your participation with the FBI eventually comes to an end? they prosecute a number of folks, including the one individual at Galleon, who, was kind of at one point, kind of the top of the triangle for some serious insider trading, where those would have been millions of dollars. End of the day, your life is turned upside down for 46 grand. That's where you sit in all this. You eventually plead guilty to those four those four trades. And you don't have to serve any jail time. So in consideration for all the excellent work you did with the FBI, um, you're set free and off you go. Now I can imagine at this point, your career at Wall Street is probably over. It would be very difficult, obviously, to get another job. And at what point did you sort of then turn to, saying, look, I can do some more good with all of this learning that I've done and experience that I've gone through, and more turn into, speaking on corporate ethics, and getting even more involved, where, really helping companies design, their compliance groups, and providing more formal ethics training. At what point did that kind of turn for you and that career path sort of open up?
So it was a slow period. So between the FBI and the Wendy's meeting to when I was sentenced was about 7 years. So it's not like a TV show where the person pleads guilty and
Yeah.
48 minutes later they're sentenced. It just kept dragging on. We would have sentencing dates that kept getting postponed. And so in that 7 year period, to try to work, I would apply for just sort of back office finance jobs. Where I live in New Jersey, there's several North American headquarters for some of the auto companies, and so BMW, Mercedes is here, and I would just look on their listings, and if anything was just a finance job, I'd apply for that. I was totally upfront with everything that had happened because I they asked the question, "Have you been convicted of a felony?" And even if I had good um, relationship with my boss or who would be my boss, HR would always say, look, we're not, they would always jump in, we're not hiring this guy because we can't take the reputational
Yeah.
hit. It could actually hurt us, which I understood. And then I thought about starting my own company. My lawyer said the best thing to do is start your own thing. And so I started a drop shipping business, which was very popular now on Amazon. But at that time, you would buy like placemats or other items on Alibaba for very cheap and then sell them on Amazon and make the price difference. And I thought maybe I'll scale that up. And one day my Chinese suppliers started hijacking my buy box on Amazon. And then I was sentenced to a prison, and I thought that would help me. Okay, now I'm sentenced. Now I can work. My lawyer's like, still a convicted felon. I'm not sure that's going to change that. But when I was sentenced, all those 7 years, I had only been sort of focused on what I could control. Couldn't control work, but I was actually pretty overweight through my career. I had gotten heavy due to the stress of all this. And so I started running and got really into running marathons and ultra marathons and was on a vegan, very clean diet and lost like 70 pounds. And the AP reporter heard that my sentencing and interviewed me. And my first podcast interview was on the Rich Roll podcast, who he's also a vegan ultra marathoner, and we had a great conversation. It was very raw. If anybody wants to listen to that first conversation, I think it was 2015 with Rich Roll, and just like I was so lost. I'm not sure what I want to do. Speaking was never even a thought. I just told him I'm going to keep running, and maybe something will work out. The FBI, the boss of the two FBI agents who I work with, heard that episode apparently and invited me to speak at the FBI. So I got, if the FBI calls you, so people know, it's like a restricted number. It doesn't say FBI; it says restricted or
Another
nothing.
lesson
They're
to be learned.
unknown.
If you if,
Yeah,
if you get a if
exactly.
you get a phone call that
No,
says restricted numbers,
exactly.
you might want to send that one to
Unknown,
voicemail.
restricted. Let it go. I'm like, hello, and so. Hey, Tom, how are you? So and so, agent from the FBI, and I had just learned I couldn't coach my daughters in sports because I had to check the box. So I told them that. And I think they thought my life was going great because I helped them. Like, guys, I'm still a convicted felon. It doesn't matter if I helped you or not. And he's like, I heard you on Rich Roll. Like, what a compelling story. I'd love to like you to come talk to our rookie agents because the rookie agents are the ones who were approaching people like me on the street who are going to be assets to them. And back when they approached me, two other people they approached like me killed themselves. So you want to
Wow.
make sure that you have a good balance with like not driving a person to do that, but also you know, using them as an asset. So I spoke at the FBI, and several FBI agents said they kept using the term "go make lemonade of lemons." They go out,
Mm.
easier said than done. Go
Yeah.
out and share this story with the industry as part of compliance training, because every couple of years on Wall Street, there's a new crop of people. Maybe it's insider trading, maybe it's setting LIBOR rates or doing something with FX. These scandals, and just personalize it because Tom, you're a regular guy, and they sometimes think it couldn't be them. So I thought, well, let me try speaking. I built a cold email list of maybe I scraped LinkedIn, like 500 compliance officers, anybody chief compliance officer of Wall Street, kind of figured out their emails, said, hey, I'm Tipper X, can I come talk to your team? I'm like, that's going to be a great subject, Tipper X. Only two responded. One thought it was not even real. Like, what's a Tipper X? Like, is this a hacking, a phishing attack? I'm like, no, I can give you a referral for that type of training. And then one guy was like, hey, I'm not going to pay you. I'm like, it's fine. He's like, this is better than probably what I can do for compliance training. So I went in. The first one was probably 2 hours. It was way too long, but just sort of like raw, emotional, lots of questions. And I'm like, could you just give me a referral to maybe three other compliance officers at bigger companies who might have budget to bring me in? I would also speak for free at like libraries or Kiwanis clubs in New Jersey. And the libraries are interesting because it's Monday night. It might be 4 80-year-olds in the crowd who hang out at the library. And they're just like, wow, there's something here, man. Like you should keep pursuing this. And then it just kind of spread. And I look up now in 8 years after that first FBI presentation, I think I'm at 580 talks
Wow,
in 13
it's
countries.
amazing.
And I don't really market it that well or sell it. I just feel like if you've heard about me and want to refer me to somebody that you think could benefit from this, I'm happy to do it that way. And so I've been very happy. I thought I might just do it for a year and then figure out how to do it with my life. And now it's been 8 years and it feels like it's going to be here for a long time. So very, very blessed that I think just by leaning into it and saying, yes, I did this, here's how I rationalized it, here's how I was, here were the pressures, and not trying to make up excuses. Or people in my situation often will hire, reputation managers to like scrub all the bad stuff on Google. And I get those emails all the time. Mr. Thomas Hardin, we found this on Google. I'm like, actually, here's my speaking website, open for business. So it's sort of like
Well,
leaning into it. Yeah.
I think it's just very relatable. I think when we
Yeah.
look at you too, I think a lot of us can see ourselves in the mirror.
Yeah.
As I think again, you're not some typical y- uh call it prisoner where and again, like from the movies where like again you look at the person from Wall Street or whomever, right? It's you hear your story, and I think a lot of us would be sympathetic to say, look, if we were placed in that same environment, would we have made the same decisions that Tom Hart made? Maybe we would have. Certainly, the vast majority of people on Wall Street at the time were making those same decisions. So who's to say we wouldn't have made those exact same decisions? Um, and I think it sometimes just takes a reminder that some of those decisions carry some pretty serious consequences. And I also think that the organizations have a responsibility as well to build out a proper control environment to make sure ethics are communicated properly. Because if that was in place when you were in those shoes, maybe different decisions would have been made. So I guess one question then, Tom, is do you think insider trading is as rampant today as it was back in the mid 2000s?
So it is pretty rampant. I think the latest, I speak at a lot of schools, so I know the professors who research suspicious trading. The latest research is the SEC only catches about 15% of illegal insider trading. So if you were to look at what is the total sort of universe of illegal insider trading by looking at the options activity before these events, before these M&A, 1 in 5 M&A events, the latest research says there's insider trading involved with suspicious option activity. 1 in 20 earnings announcements, there's buying of
Wow.
options or buying of puts if it's a negative. So it's still, I don't think it's the sort of my old industry because there's a robust training now. I'm out here doing this to, I think it's over 250 hedge funds. So I think they know my story and just sort of like, okay, here's how this happens. I think it's more sophisticated, maybe organized crime overseas who can get into the issuer information and trade the earnings or trade the M&A. So I think the challenge with the SEC is they have a $2 billion budget, but if you're going against all the bad actors in the world, it's just a lack of resources. The average case, so we mentioned my 46,000. The average SEC case is 58,000. So that might be
Wow.
shocking to people,
That's
where
shit.
46,000 is actually the story. And you think you read these cases, why did this person just throw away their career for 58 or 46? Occasionally there's the $1 million case that they use for sort of PR, like, hey, it could be anybody. But if you look at the median and not the average, just the median, I think is like the 58 thousand. So
And the name that I would throw around um, is Martha Stewart.
Hmm.
You know, you look. I don't exactly know the crime she actually pleaded guilty for, but I think where she got herself wrapped up is in she was privy to insider information, as many of those people. If you're a celebrity of that status, you are going to have connections that the layman person like myself will not have. I can just imagine the amount of rumors and information that would be thrown at her. And like you said, she doesn't work in an industry that is where they have a compliance group that may shut it down before she decides to trade. Her level of knowledge of that might not be the same. So she acts on that information and then boom, she runs into an issue. Is that because what does it even matter? Like does the dollar value even matter? Could it have been a dollar, Tom, and you still would have been stuck?
The SEC, the lowest case I'm aware of is the SEC brought a case for $4,000 in illicit
Wow.
gain. So you would think it cost the SEC more than that. And I think the point they were trying to make it is it doesn't matter the dollar amount. But 58, I think, in the context of your career, why would you throw it away for that? And so it doesn't matter. And Martha Stewart she actually lied to the FBI, so they got her for what's called obstructing justice, not telling the truth. But to be honest, and I know a lot of people know this, I mean, today with Congress in the US, it's pretty egregious. There's this Stock Act that came out 10 or 12 years ago that if Congress people don't report their trades, they pay a $250 fine. So it's like, all right, pick your congressperson. They're going to make millions of dollars and pay the fine. And I get these questions all the time when I speak at conferences. They got you for 46. What about so and so congressperson that just made millions on this? We can see the filing. I'm like, who makes the laws in the U.S.? We'll see what happens, but I don't expect it to change. So I think that's where it's happening today too.
Well, look, and it boils down to life is not fair.
Right.
Um, right? It's just not. Again, your whole life gets turned up for 46 grand. How many people walked away? Like the guy from the swimming pool, right? Where's he vacationing? In Bermuda or Barbados, all the nicest places in the world, and your life gets turned upside down. Life is just not fair. And I totally 100% agree with you. Now, the other one I just want to touch on quickly was, you work at you mentioned Moody's, for
Mhm.
folks that work at a public company, if, like I do, if you take that information and share it with family members or you share it with your neighbor, inadvertently or not, are you breaking the law by even just doing that?
Yeah, if you share the information, so you think about if it's material, so if it was public, if it would move the stock price, non-public, and if you're breaching your fiduciary duty to your employer, which you are by sharing material, non-public information, you are in violation. Now, whether there's two, as I mentioned, there's in the U.S. there's the SEC and the FBI, and the same in Canada. There's a regulator and there's law enforcement. The regulator has the lower burden of proof. The SEC in the U.S. just has the preponderance of evidence. So if it's 51% chance that you breached your duty, they'll bring a case. So people know they lose a lot of cases. But once you're reputationally charged by the SEC, whether you win
Yeah.
or lose, your career is over. So that's the point where you may actually say, "Oh, I went to court or I went to trial and I was found not guilty. Oh, good luck, restarting somewhere else."
And maybe as we look forward, is there any chance that, I know we shared a couple emails over Billions. Every time I watch
Right.
Billions, I'm now reminded of your case, Tom, is that whole show is very much based on a lot of insider trading and the push pull between the government and the folks who are actually doing the trades. Any chance that your story turns into a Netflix special or a book or something along those lines? Anything in the pipe?
That's you. That's one of my projects right now. So I just actually signed a book deal um, last week. So we're in October
Oh,
here,
congratulations.
2024. Thank you. So I've been looking for a few years to find the right publisher. I didn't want to self-publish. I wanted to find somebody who had good distribution into really academia, which I think for students to hear this would be good. And so we found I think a great publishing partner. So actually look for the book probably early 2026. I have 12 months to get out the manuscript, probably going through all that pre-orders. So there will be a book, and concurrently I'm working on a scripted rights screenplay. I'm working with a young writer director to put that together. So hopefully, like you said, that'll be in somebody's Netflix algorithm, maybe around the time the book comes out. So I can only speak so many places, and I think just to have something like a book or a scripted drama, it would reach a lot more people, obviously, than what I could do speaking.
Cool. Well, if you want to track down Tom, just look up TipperX. He's got his own website. Like I said, he consults and speaks on a regular basis. You can catch him all over the place. You look up TipperX or Tom Hardin. You'll get all of his information. But Tom, thank you very much for coming on. I can imagine constantly sharing your story. Like you say, make lemonade out of lemons. Easier said than done to go and talk about some of the hardest moments. Again, you talked about being suicidal and things like that. Again, I think we can all relate to your whole career being turned upside down. Going in and talking about this on a regular basis, certainly easier said than done. No doubt about, no doubt about. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, if not the majority, who would have just preferred it never happened and just tried to forget the whole, to forget the whole thing. But you've turned it around and are really trying to help the industry. So, but again, thank you very much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And when your book comes out, we'd love to have you back to talk about your book. That would be a lot of fun. But we really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure.
Well, that wraps another episode of CSI Chat, and I really wanted to thank everybody for listening. If you want to keep up to date on CSI Chat, I would encourage everyone to join our CSI Chat LinkedIn group and or follow us on Twitter/X under CSI Chat. With that, I will get you out of here on a high note with some music, and thanks again.
Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our host an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. CSI Chat, where the numbers meet the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with the clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic set us free. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with the clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic set us free. CSI Chat is the podcast you'll adore. With our accountant host, you'll always want more. So grab your headphones and join the fun on CSI Chat, where the mystery's never done. We'll see the